There are a ton of parallels between real estate investment and the theatrical investment. So when I've spoken with people who are interested in, investing in shows with us, it's usually my real estate friends, and it's very easy to draw those analogies because they really do exist.
Welcome to the Foundery, where leaders are forged daily. And now your host, George Roberts.
Welcome back, entrepreneurs. We have an amazing guest for you today. Matt Picheny is a two-time Tony Award-winning producer, author of Backstage Guide to Real Estate, and a multifamily investor with an amazing story to tell. Welcome to the show, Matt.
Oh, thanks, George. It's a pleasure to be here.
Let's get started by telling our audience, who is Matt Picheny?
Oh, that's a good question. I think you already gave a really good intro. I am a real estate investor and syndicator. I'm also a father of two adorable young children and a husband, and a really big fan of art and theater. It's something that I'm passionate about. I had grew up in Orlando, Florida, and moved to New York City to pursue a career in theater. And I did that professionally for 5 years. I was in 15 different productions all across the country. And then I got involved in digital marketing and then ultimately real estate. So that's my 9 to 5 is real estate. But I enjoy spending time with my family, and I love especially live music. I mean, that's my favorite thing. Are you big into music, George?
Oh yeah, I'm huge. If I didn't have my fake background, unlike your real background over there, you could see my guitar. I've got a Stratocaster. I have a piano.
Oh, nice.
And as far as art goes, I like to gild. And if I were able to take you downstairs, you'd be able to see some of the things that I've covered with 24 karat gold. So art is wonderful. It's one of the things that makes life beautiful.
I agree.
Well, let's go deeper into the art. So I know that as a producer, you produce some of the most famous shows on Broadway, including American Utopia and Moulin Rouge. Tell us a little bit about what a producer does to take a show from the concept to its adoring audience.
Yeah. So, I am a co-producer on those shows along with my wife. Being an actor and having the theatrical background that I have, I understand theater and know how it works. But that's my wife's 9 to 5 job. I mean, that's what she does, is the business end of theater. In terms of being able to collaborate with her and work on these shows together is super exciting and a lot of fun. And there's many different things and different stages in which we have and can be involved in shows. Sometimes we're involved in shows, like we're working on something right now with a writer, 2 writers that we know, a book writer and a songwriter, and they've put together a show, and we like it, and we're going to see where it goes, and spending some time and some effort and some money behind doing some workshops and doing some writing sessions and just kind of seeing if it seems like it's going to have legs. But shows can be done like that can go on for years before it goes to Broadway. I mean, I think Hamilton was in the works for, I think, close to, I don't quote me on this, but I think close to 10 years in terms of, when Lin-Manuel Miranda first read the book, right? He read a novel about a biography about Hamilton, and then said, oh, this would make a great musical. And then he started working on it. And, sometimes these shows take a long time to have the concept and develop the songs. And then, they write songs, and then some of the songs don't work and they change them around. When I was in musical theater conservatory, so when I moved to New York, I did that for a couple of years. And there used to be a CD series called Lost in Boston. And the thing was, so all the Broadway shows used to be done in Boston before they came to Broadway. And that's where they would put them in front of live audiences and see, what jokes actually worked. Some jokes you think it's funny on paper and they do it on stage and it just doesn't get a laugh, or sometimes you get a laugh where you weren't expecting it. And the same thing with the songs. So there were some songs, and there's some good songs that just get cut from a show for one reason or another, just didn't work with the show. And so there used to be like, famous musicals like Oklahoma or whatever, that and there's like this song that no one ever knows because it got cut, but it's actually a pretty decent song. So yeah. So I think, the shows can take a long time, and sometimes they can be done much quicker. Sometimes there's just a show and everything comes together really quickly, and it can go to Broadway very quickly. And sometimes they work on them for years, decades.
Right. Yeah. It sounds like a commercial real estate deal. Sometimes shorter, sometimes takes an awful long time to close.
Yeah, that's true.
So I'm kind of seeing a bit of a parallel there, right? I mean, you talked about the early phases there. You're starting with a script, the concept, kind of like looking for the property. But as I understand, though, you're also doing things like financing the production, hiring the creative staff, and then supervising the development. So I feel like there's a pretty strong parallel between what you're doing there and maybe the life of a syndicator.
Yeah, there are a ton of parallels. For instance, on a Broadway show, you've got a general manager who is basically like the property manager. And so that there's a thing called a recoupment chart, and the recoupment chart is very similar to your underwriting of your deal. When you're looking at the recoupment chart, they'll look at, an average price for each ticket. Well, that's kind of the same as your rent. And then you have like, your occupancy in real estate, and that has to do with also the occupancy of the theater. So there's a lot of, I think, parallels between the two, which make it pretty easy for a real estate investor to wrap their head around the theatrical stuff.
Awesome. So what are some of those lessons that you learned in theater that you were able to apply to your syndication career?
Are you ready to build passive income through investing in multifamily real estate? Take the next step by heading to www.horizonmultifamily.com and click Get Started to schedule a call.
So those really harken back to my days as an actor. And if I had to boil it all down to one thing, it would be persistence. Persistence is really key, and it's actually one of the keystone concepts that I talk about in the book that I wrote. I have a couple of stories in there about that persistence, but I'm going to give you an example of one. When I was younger, have you ever been to Disney World?
Oh yeah.
Okay, so have you ever gone to Disney and like in front of the Magic Kingdom, like in front of the castle at the Magic Kingdom, you'll see people doing a show?
Yes, love that.
So when I was a kid, I auditioned to do that. So during the holidays, they'll have little kids in the show during, like the Christmas break or whatever. And my sister was in dance school and wanted to go and audition for these dances. And I had taken some dance classes as well. And so I went to audition as well, but I was kind of just along for the ride. My sister really wanted to do this thing. And we go to the audition, and there's like 5 billion women, young girls auditioning, and there's like 10 guys. I mean, there's just not that many guys who are interested in that kind of thing. And I ended up getting a call back to advance further in the audition. I actually went to Disney World, like behind the scenes, and went to one of the rehearsal studios and auditioned. And so before I got to the audition, people had been telling me, I had a few days before the callback, make sure you smile. Make sure you smile. They like smiles at Disney. You got to smile when you're there. So I get there and I smiled the entire day. Whether I was doing the dance or I'm standing on the side, sitting down, waiting, I just ear to ear grin, Every time they look at me, I'm there with this like probably sickening smile. My cheeks, I was in pain that night when I got home. They were hurting so bad from just smile. Every time they look, I'm smiling. So I ended up getting the show, which was really awesome. It was really cool to like work at Disney World I think I was like 12 years old at the time. And it was a phenomenal experience. I was in the rehearsals, and my father spoke with the director during a break, and he was like, I'm just curious, like, why did you pick my son for the show? And the director told him, listen, your son's talented. I mean, he's very talented, but anybody who made it to the callbacks was a talented person. I mean, like, everybody was good. And then at that point, we're just trying to figure out who's the best fit with this one and that thing. Every time we looked at Matt, there he was smiling. He didn't stop smiling the entire day. Every time we looked at him, and we thought, this kid's going to work so hard. If he wants this so bad, he's going to work so hard. And also, he'll probably be so devastated if he doesn't get the part. And that's why I got it. I mean, I was just as good as the next guy, but I'm just sitting there with this crazy, crazy smile. So that, I think, was the first time that I really learned the importance of persistence, and also the importance of a smile, right? So, but it was something that I think helped get me beyond where maybe I would have been. And I have there's other stories like that, where persistence has just been something that's really helped me in acting, and now also in other things in life. And the other thing is that ties into persistence is being able to accept rejection. As an actor, I went on audition after audition after audition, and I would not get parts. And same thing is going to happen as a producer. When Erica and I work on shows, we have shows that don't do well. And like I said, we're working on this kind of new thing, and that might not go anywhere. But, just because something doesn't advance to the next round, it doesn't mean that it wasn't a little minor success of in its own right. But being able to kind of face that rejection and then continue to pursue what that thing is, that goal that you're trying to achieve, that's something that I learned from acting as well.
That's amazing. I love those lessons. And I'd like to maybe take that a little further. So you did mention that you do invest in shows as well. And I think that two of the most famous shows that you've invested in would be Wicked and Hamilton, which you've already mentioned, right? And yeah. So I wonder if there are some parallels. Many people would consider real estate itself like, wow, that's kind of out there. I'm going to wire $50,000 or maybe even more to somebody that I met through the internet. Do you think that maybe some of the conversations you had with people to invest in these Broadway shows in your financing role as a producer, I'm sure that's got to be a lot of help to having those conversations with people in real estate. So what do you think? Are there some people that are just not up for these sorts of alternative investments, or is it just all about having somebody to sort of show you the ropes?
Well, being that my wife's full-time job is in the theater, she's pretty good. And I think together as a team, we're pretty good at choosing shows that can be successful, but they're not all successful. And as a matter of fact, 80% of shows on Broadway. So when it comes to investing in, I don't talk that much about the Broadway stuff. I usually talk about the real estate stuff because that's sort of my 9-to-5 thing. And that's the thing that I know really well. And that's the thing that I feel sure there is risk involved in it, but it's a little bit more like the types of investments that I do. I'm looking for high cash flow. I'm looking for a lot of base hits.
Right.
And most of the syndications that I do are a 506B. So that basically means that I'm allowed to bring in not only accredited investors, but also sophisticated investors, up to 35 sophisticated investors. So people who still understand the risks of real estate, understand the basics of how real estate works, but maybe don't meet those sort of financial thresholds that are required to get the accredited investor status. When it comes to the Broadway stuff, it's only accredited investors. The investment minimums are usually less than what you'll find in typical syndications. It's all depend, right? All these things depend, right? But it needs to be someone who has a very high risk appetite. I mean, the reward can be incredible if you invest in Phantom of the Opera, 40 years ago, 30 years ago, whatever it was. It's still running on Broadway, and you're probably very happy. But you can also have shows that just close like the day after they open, and you can lose. It can be a total loss. I haven't seen And I know that there are, and I'm not claiming that real estate is foolproof, because I know that there are, but I've yet to experience or know someone who had a complete total loss from real estate. I have lost, and I know people who have lost money in real estate deals, but I've never known anyone who's like lost like all 100%, like everything. It's all like they lost the entire thing. And I know there are people who have it, just not firsthand that I've met, but in the theatrical world, it's quite common that you just like a complete total loss. So while you can have this outsized return, you can have an incredible loss. So it's not for the faint of heart. And I think it's for people who are interested in the arts and who like the arts and who want to support that and like sort of the social messages maybe that are, a lot of the shows teach a lesson or have some sort of message behind them or moral to them. And so if you believe in that, it's a good thing to support. I love supporting the arts.
Awesome. Yeah, much more like venture capital in the you're saying like it's 5-1, but at least that's probably twice as good as venture capital. That's more like 1 in 10.
Well, that's the statistic that I've heard, and that has to do with just recouping, not with making a profit, but just breaking even.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Fair enough.
I don't know if there is, real published data. That's just what I know anecdotally, that it's about 80% that don't recoup.
Yeah, fair enough. Well, and other things you did is that I understand for many years, your W-2 work and your real estate were really going side by side. And it looks like you're one of those people who had a really smooth takeoff. I know a lot of people, they hear about real estate and they want to quit their job the next day. So do you have any advice for how to have that sort of a smooth takeoff?
Don't quit your day job. I was an overnight success that was 10 years in the making. Right. Okay. So because, you hear about all these like overnight successes, but a lot of times when you dig into it, they've been doing it for a really long time. And so I got involved in real estate haphazardly, actually. It was 2001. The dot-com bubble had just burst. All my clients were going out of business. And my landlord told me that I had 90 days to get out. So I ended up getting an apartment and then buying a place and then selling it 2.5 years later and quadrupling my equity and saying, wow, I got to do this real estate thing more. And then over a course of about 10 years, I did more real estate things as a hobby while I was working my 9-to-5 job. A little over 6 years ago now is when I made the transition from part-time real estate to full-time real estate. And then it then took me 2 years from there to actually get the first syndication that I sponsored. I was looking, I was meeting, I was building relationships. And so that's another thing, just to harken back. I don't want to talk about the Broadway stuff too much, but just to harken back to, those investments that you had talked about, it was because of the relationships we had, because of my wife's relationships. But, when, she grew up with a lot of these people and worked with a lot of these people who are, when I say grew up, like she got out of college and then she's just been in the industry for so long that people who were interns when she was an intern are now doing other things and she's doing other things, and they can collaborate and they're friends. And we've been at certain people's weddings and they were like at our wedding, and we're legitimately friends with a lot of these people who are involved in these different things. The same thing with like real estate, and with real estate, for the first deal that I did was in a market that I don't live in. It was in Kansas City. And I was living in Boston, Massachusetts. And so for people in Kansas City, brokers and property managers, when I'm buying a $10 million property, for them to feel comfortable knowing that I can close on a $10 million deal, it's not going to be some guy who just sent them an email on the internet. I mean, unless I had $10 million in the bank, proof of funds or something like that, then maybe, but I'm, syndicating deals, I'm raising the capital, and I had to get to know these people and they had to get to know me so that they would feel comfortable speaking to their client and saying, hey, listen, this guy, Matt Picheny, he wants to buy the property. He's put in a very strong offer and we believe that he'll be able to close, because as you know, George, these transactions can take 90 to 120 days, just sort of depending on the situation from when a deal is awarded till it closes. I mean, obviously the seller wants it to happen in 60 days, but sometimes it takes longer. And then if the deal falls apart, then they have to go back to the drawing board. I mean, that it's not a situation anybody wants to be in. So they want to make sure that whoever gets awarded the property, off of those bids is actually going to be able to close. So it took me a while to develop those relationships.
Awesome. And as you're building those relationships, I know that you did several deals as a limited partner. Maybe you can tell us some of the lessons learned and what you would recommend to people who think, hey, maybe I want to be a general partner. How do you get there?
So in terms of limited partner and being a passive investor in deals, I think it's great. And 2/3 of my portfolio to this day are deals that I am a passive investor in. I can't be active in every market and know every market. And there's a lot of good operators. There's also bad ones out there too, so be careful. But there's a lot of good operators out there, and I can invest through them. And it's really, it is passive. You can make money while you sleep, but there is a lot of work that needs to be done up front. You need to become educated as an investor. That's the whole reason why I wrote this book, was to help educate people about passive investments and how to look at them. So once you know how to look at deals and how to evaluate sponsors, so I say that there's 3 things to look at: the sponsor, the market, and the deal itself. Once you know how to do that and look at those things, it can be very lucrative, and it can be something that you can do relatively quickly. And once you've done that initial vetting and you write the big check, which might be the hardest thing, you're trusting someone with a lot of money, but then that's it. You really don't have any control over the deal, but hopefully you've done your work right. And hopefully the person you picked is good and they'll give you returns and you don't really have to do anything for it. And so that's what I did I did 5 deals that I invested in before my first deal as a syndicator. And I learned a lot from it. The first deal that I did didn't go great. There's a whole chapter in my book about it. And the thing that I learned from it was, I really need to make sure I understand the sponsor and who the sponsor is. And I'm not saying that the sponsor of that deal wasn't good. Actually, conversely, I would say that the sponsor on that deal, while I do think there were mistakes that were made initially with the underwriting and everything, that sponsor I owe a debt of gratitude to, because we should have lost a lot of money on that deal. And we ended up walking away with a slight profit. It wasn't really much to speak of, but that was because that sponsor worked tirelessly day and night to make sure the sponsor is actually an airplane pilot. And I say he did everything to make sure that he landed that plane. It did not crash and burn, right? Because that was really important to him. And I think that there are a lot of other people who would have just given up and I would have lost money. And so it became evidently clear to me through that deal, like the one biggest takeaway from that deal. There was many takeaways, but the biggest was this sponsor is the most important thing that you're looking at in the deal. And then to answer the second part of your question, George, was like, how does one progress from a limited partner to a general partner? Through a lot of hard work and a lot of building of relationships. I will say this, I speak with a lot of people and I try to help people out wherever I can. And so I have people that I've talked with who are interested in becoming a general partner, and they start down that road. And some of them end up saying to me, you know what, Matt, I don't know that I want to be a general partner. It's not for everyone. Now, they don't regret it. I think they learn a lot, and then they end up being passive investors in a lot of deals, and they know how to look at deals, I think maybe even more than some limited partners, because they went down that road and really understand how to do the underwriting. But it is another job. So, it's hard work, and there's hours involved. It's not like, this some grandiose lifestyle where you don't do anything. Now, the passive investment part of it is, right? And that's why 2/3 of my portfolio, I don't even have to really worry about. I mean, I do the vetting and that's it. But the deals that I'm the active, that I'm the sponsor on, I'm active, I'm involved. If the deal's running perfectly, at least 1 hour a week, okay? Because we have 1 hour check-ins with our property management team on a weekly basis. But on most of the deals, it's not just that 1 hour a week. There's many other things that are going on, other meetings, emails, phone calls, and there's a lot of stuff that happens and a lot of travel to go and visit the property. I live in New York City. Most of my properties are in the South and the Midwest. So that requires me getting on a plane.
So let's go back to that limited partner experience. So you're a passive investor for the first time. Deal. How did you find out that the deal was going south or sideways? And tell us about the importance of communication and how you were able to take so much out of that.
So when I invested in that deal, I had a conversation with the airplane pilot sponsor. And he knew that I wanted to sponsor my own deals. And I said to him, this is my very first investment. I said, listen, I'm going to invest. This is a lot of money for me to invest in one of these things. I've never done one of these before and everything, but I trust you. But I also want this to be a learning experience for me. I want to be able to reach out to you and talk with you about this stuff. And we had already, like I said, we already had developed a friendship. So I felt comfortable with that. And I was like, hey, look, I'm not going to be obnoxious. Like I didn't call him every week or anything like that. But I was like, hey, once in a while, if something comes up, I want to learn a little bit more. And he was like, of course, Matt, no problem. Not an issue. We got the deal. We closed on the deal. The deal started operating. It takes usually like a month or two before you start getting the statements. I started getting the statements. So they were good about communication on a monthly basis. But there was some stuff in the statements that I didn't understand. And that was just a lack of my own knowledge. And I was able to get on the phone with that particular sponsor and he explained things to me. And so it was a really good learning experience because of my relationship. Again, it all comes back to relationships, my relationship with that sponsor. Although the financial gain wasn't what we had all hoped for, it still was okay. And I'm not sure if that answered all of your question, but.
Yeah, well, there's just one thing I'd like to bring out there, and I think there are many lessons in there, but just the openness. Everybody in this business tends to be very open. I've never seen such a friendly business before. And so you just reached out and they were very happy. I mean, even a deal that may be going sort of sideways, they were very happy to sort of let you in, take you into their confidence and tell you like maybe even more than you might get from the monthly statements or maybe from a quarterly webinar. So I would say if people are interested in learning, and I've heard of a lot of people like that, that they get to become general partners, sometimes it goes worse. Like the sponsor will step out or step aside, maybe forced aside, and people actually end up running one of those deals. And it's something you have to be prepared for.
Yeah, and sometimes the transparency isn't there. Right. And so that was something that I made sure to set up ahead of time. And it's something that I look at when I'm vetting sponsors. You want to see how they are responding to your questions before you invest. And if they are and they're open, like you're saying, then that's probably a good indication that that's how they're going to be through the whole deal. But if you start asking questions at the beginning of a deal, and when you're looking at deciding whether you want to invest in it or not, and maybe they're being kind of cagey or non-responsive, that might be a sign to you that maybe your values aren't aligned necessarily with that of the sponsor. So that's an important thing to think about as you're vetting them, right? You want that transparency, and a lot of people are, but there are some that aren't.
Right. Awesome. And I know you've made mention of your book. For those of you watching on YouTube, you can see Backstage Guide to Real Estate behind our guest. I know that, we got it right here. Holding up our copy. But now that's going to come out, I believe, February 9th, correct?
Yeah, that's right.
Awesome. So yeah, get it now. I believe you can get a discount if you pre-order. And
That's
I always
right.
like to say that a great property has a great acquisition story. I would say, obviously, the same thing with a book. Maybe you can tell us the story behind the story. How did you come to write this book?
Yes, I had a meetup that I was running in Boston. And over the years, it got really big. we would have over 100 people on average at this meetup. Sometimes we'd have over 200 people, and people started to, there's a lot of local investors who, maybe own like a triplex or a duplex or smaller multifamily. They started, I think, over time by hearing from me and I would talk once a year, and we've had all these other guests come and talk and do presentations, start to become very comfortable and familiar with real estate syndications and maybe want to try one out. And they would come to me and say, hey, Matt, like, I know you invest passively in deals and you've sponsored some deals. Like, would you look at this deal for me and tell me what you think? And I would be happy to sit down and talk with them about the deal. I would never tell somebody whether it's the right thing for them to invest in or not, but I would look at the underwriting and say, this seems a little fishy. They have rent growth of 50% for the next, every year for the next 10 years. That seems really high. Like, maybe you want to ask them about that. I'm exaggerating, of course, but there would be certain metrics that I would look at that would just seem a little strange to me, maybe that I would point out. And as the meetup grew and the volume of this became more and more, it was taking up a lot of my time to do this. And while I loved helping people out, there's only so many hours in the day. And what I ended up doing was thinking, hey, why don't I write this all down and give people a little handbook on how to invest passively? So I did. I wrote a little thing. Never saw the light of day because it was 70 pages of the most dense, boring thing you've ever laid eyes on. It had all the good information in there, but it was all like facts and figures and statistics and just horrible thing to try to read. And what I ended up doing was I spent like 9 months redoing the whole thing and talking about my journey through real estate and following my narrative and teaching those things that were in that initial version, but through stories and teaching them along the way that I learned it. So now the book has these 18 keystone concepts that I learned on my journey, starting with very basic concepts like this is what an asset is and this is what a liability is, all the way to complex real estate deals. At the end of the book, we're talking about air rights deals and 1031 exchanges. So through that whole book, there's you sort of progress as I progressed in my career. And I have 60 different real estate terms that are defined and explained within the book. So it is an educational book, but it's full of like fun stories, like that story I told earlier about Disney, like fun and interesting and kind of not the kind of things that you might expect to find in a book about real estate.
Yeah, I love some of those examples you called out because I know that you actually have done a deal that involved air rights. Any other interesting value adds or new streams of revenue that you were able to do in your properties?
There's been a lot, there was an air rights deal that we did. I'm always about adding value, and we do things from renovating interiors to exteriors. We've done, and these are all discussed in the book. We've done water conservation programs, which I always like. My ethos is to do every deals that are win-wins. Yeah. But that's really a win-win-win because it's a win for the residents. A lot of the times, in the particular example in the book, the residents were paying the water bill. So they saw their water bills cut in a third. We did it on a Fannie Mae green program. So it allowed us to get a lower interest rate. So it was good for the investors and it's good for the planet too. That's the third win. We were saving water, conserving water. We all know that there's some sort of climate change stuff going on, and anything that we can do to help reduce greenhouse emissions and not waste resources like water is, I think, really important. So we talk about that. We do things like private backyards, change the amenities in the different properties, cash out refinance. I talk about cash out refinances. Yeah. That's actually the keystone concept number 18 is refinance when you can, but do it responsibly. So there's a lot of different concepts that are covered in the books and different ways to add value, whether you're doing a single family home or buying 200 units.
Great. Yeah. And if it isn't obvious, that third win, of course, is the Freddie Mac green loan, because I know they've got some pretty awesome incentives in there. You
great.
already really hit doing well by doing good. I know that's one of the main themes. So I think that's something really important for people to know about your story. And I think each one of those keystone concepts, I believe you got those laid out as a sort of a ticket, right? You put a
Yep,
lot of
that's
thought
right.
into the layout of the book. So that's really awesome. So I look forward to getting the final version of that. That's really amazing. One of the things I'd also like to do is give you an opportunity to sort of give our audience some direction as to how they can become better entrepreneurs. I know we didn't talk too much about your digital marketing business, but any major lessons learned there that you think can apply to new business owners or maybe existing business owners?
Yeah, I think um, my own personal ethos. I think you need to find out what your own personal ethos is, right? But my own personal ethos is like you said, trying to do well by doing good and be an ethical business owner. I'm trying to, in when it comes to real estate, reinvent property ownership as a positive for communities. You know, landlords get a really, really bad rap, and there are a lot of us that are landlords that are actually doing really great things for people. I think that following your passions, that's just been a recurring theme in my life. I mean, I moved to New York to pursue a career in theater, which was my passion. Then I got involved in digital marketing because I was interested in that, and that was another passion. And then ultimately real estate. If you can follow your passions and find ways to make your passion profitable, that's good. I mean, so, and then you look at like what I'm doing now. So I'm a real estate investor, but I still love art and theater, and I'm still involved in that. I find ways to try to make sure that that I can still stay attached to that in one way or another.
Super. And then what are some of the books that have forged you as a leader and as an entrepreneur?
There's a lot of great books out there. The one book that had the most impact on me in my current life is the purple book that everybody, I'm sure, on your show mentions, which is Robert Kiyosaki's Rich Dad Poor Dad. That had a profound impact on me. But since then, I've read so many different books. It's hard to say. You know, The One Thing, Gary Keller. It's a really great book. I just got from my business partner. I haven't started reading it yet, but I'm looking forward to Ray Dalio's Principles. One of my business partners gave me that as a holiday gift, so that's on the list. I'll probably start breaking into that one next week. Very much looking forward to that. But there's so many good. I mean, I feel bad naming a few because there's so many good ones that I'm sure that I've left out.
Awesome. Now, how do people reach you?
Oh, the best way to reach me is on my website, and there you can find a link to order the book, or you can sign up for my newsletter, which has investor tips and things of that nature. And I've got a great blog on there. So that's all on picheny.com. And it's not a very common last name, so I'll spell that for you. It's P like in Peter, ICHENY.com. And I'm sure you'll probably put a link to that in the show notes.
Absolutely. If you're driving, don't stop, don't start. Don't start scribbling. You'll find that in the show notes. Absolutely. And if you could just send us out with, I know, again, your ethos is about doing well by doing good. Can you send us out with a heartwarming story of your entrepreneurial journey?
Heartwarming story. Well, I think what I've learned through the process of writing this book, I learned a lot about myself, and I learned a lot about what's important to me, what my values are, and how I can use my money as a force of change, positive change in the world. And so that's been the big takeaway for me that I hope is heartwarming. You know, it's the subtitle I have for the book is Produce Passive Income, Write Your Own Story, and Direct Your Dollars Towards Positive Change. And that's where I really think it is if you can generate passive income, you don't have to trade your time for money anymore, right? You don't have to necessarily work specific hours and get paid for those, but you have money that you're generating. Then you have the freedom to really write your own story, whatever that story is, and then you can be positive change in the world. I have a friend who is a real estate syndicator as well. He's produced a lot of passive income for himself, and he's very passionate about animals. So he spends a lot of his time working, not a lot of, but he spends time, working with charities and animals. My father-in-law is an ophthalmologist, and he is retired, and he has donated time where he goes into South America and helps do these like clinics for these rural communities that, where the people have cataract, completely free. This is a charitable cause. And, he's retired now. So he has the freedom to write his own story. Right. And he's doing, positive change, right, in the world, directing his dollars or his time towards positive change. And that's something that I try to do. I've been involved in some philanthropic efforts where it comes to preventing homelessness. I was very involved in this awesome charity in Boston that was, it wasn't like a housing shelter, it was permanent housing for people who were homeless. But also I think that theater can affect change as well, which is why I get involved in theater. I think there's a social aspect to that. And a lot of the shows I get involved in have a social message behind them. So I don't know if that's heartwarming. I hope it is, or at least I hope it's aspirational, that if you can create ways where you have more time to write your own story, you can affect positive change in the world. And that's something that I'm trying to do.
Matt, I want to thank you so much for taking the time to come on the Foundry and to speak to your audience today.
That was my pleasure. Thanks for having me on, George.